My mother abandoned me for her new family. Years later, she came back only to take the house I inherited. But I had their ending ready. When I was a kid, around 6 or 7, my mom got remarried to a guy named Nick. At first, it seemed like a good thing because, maybe having another parent around would make life feel more complete. I was wrong, though. Nick wasn't just bringing himself into our lives, he had a son too, Ben, who was 6 years older than me. Let me tell you, the minute they moved in, it was like I was suddenly invisible. I still remember that first day they officially moved in. Mom was all smiles, helping Nick and Ben set up their rooms and hanging up family photos on the walls. But when I looked at those photos later, it was all pictures of them, Mom, Nick, and Ben. Not a single picture of me. It felt weird, like how can you call it a family when you don't even include your own kid? Things got clearer as time went on. Mom started acting like Ben was her world. She'd make his favorite meals, help him with homework, and even go to his soccer games, all while I was sitting at home alone. I'd ask her, "Hey, can I come too?" And she'd make up excuses, saying it was just for them or Ben's having a special day. It felt like no matter what I did, I was just extra. Ben was no help either. He made sure I knew I wasn't welcome. He'd walk past my room and say stuff like, no one really wants you here. If I ever told Mom or Nick about it, they'd just shrug it off like, oh, he's just being a boy, or, even worse, they'd tell me to be the bigger person and show Ben some respect because he was my big brother. They expected me to respect someone who was making my life a living hell. I tried to ignore it, but it wasn't easy. Ben had this way of making every day feel like I was walking on eggshells. He'd take my stuff and hide it or, worse, break it. When I'd confront him, he'd just laugh and say it was an accident. Once, he trashed my favorite dollhouse, a gift from my dad before he left us. I remember crying, trying to glue the pieces back together, while Ben just watched, smirking. When I showed Mom, hoping she'd finally get mad at him, she just told me, maybe you shouldn't leave your things out where they can get ruined. Like, what was that even supposed to mean? Speaking of my dad, that's where things get really twisted. My mom had this weird thing about my dad. She'd always talk about him like he was some monster. Look, I'm not saying he was perfect, he definitely wasn't. I know he drank a lot, and yeah, he cheated on her. But to her, he was the ultimate villain, and somehow, I was guilty by association. I remember one time, I must have been around 10, and I was arguing with Ben because he was hogging the TV, like usual. My mom walked in, and instead of stopping him, she looked at me with this cold expression and said, "You're acting just like your father." That one hurt. It's not like I asked to look like him, but every time she looked at me, it felt like she was seeing him instead. It didn't matter what I did, I could get straight A's, keep my room spotless, help out around the house. She always found some way to compare me to him, and it was never in a good way. The more I think about it, the more I realize that she only had energy for Ben. I'd come home from school, and the house would smell like fresh cookies, but they weren't for me. I'd find Ben in the kitchen, eating a whole batch Mom had baked just for him. When I asked why I couldn't have any, she'd say something like, "These are for Ben, he needs to keep his strength up for soccer." I wasn't even allowed to have a single one. And the worst part? There were times when Nick and Mom would take Ben out for special outings. They'd go to amusement parks, movies, sometimes even weekend trips. I remember standing in the doorway, watching them pack up the car. I'd ask if I could come along, and Mom would give me this half-hearted smile and say, "Maybe next time, sweetie, this one's just for Ben." But that next time never came. I spent a lot of weekends alone, feeling like I was stuck in the background of my own life. The only escape I had was my grandparents, my dad's parents. They were the only people who really made me feel like I mattered. They'd pick me up sometimes on weekends and take me out to their house. We'd bake cookies, and I'd get to eat as many as I wanted. They never treated me like I was a problem or an afterthought. I'd tell them about what was going on at home, how Ben would push me around and how my mom seemed to have forgotten I existed. My grandpa would listen quietly, his face turning serious, and then he'd say, "You're nothing like your father. You're your own person, and you're better than all of this." Those weekends were like a breath of fresh air. For a little while, I could pretend that I wasn't the unwanted stepchild, that I was just a regular kid with people who loved me. But going back home was always a harsh reality check. The moment I'd walk through the door, it felt like the air got colder. I could feel the resentment coming from my mom, and Ben would be right there, ready to start up again. It was a cycle that just wouldn't end. Looking back, it's easy to see the pattern. My mom made a choice. She chose Nick, she chose Ben, and she chose to leave me on the outside looking in. It wasn't just favoritism, it was straight up neglect. I was like this reminder she couldn't get rid of, a reminder of a past she hated. Instead of dealing with that in a healthy way, she took it out on me. Ben, on the other hand, fed off that energy. He knew he was the golden child, and he used it. He'd find ways to make me feel small, whether it was taking my stuff or spreading lies about me at school. The few times I tried to stand up for myself, I'd get punished. One time, I shouted back at him after he called me worthless. My mom grounded me for a week and told me, "Respect your brother, he's been through a lot." I remember thinking, what about me? Haven't I been through a lot too? But no one ever asked me how I felt. No one cared about the fact that I felt like an outsider in my own home. It was always about making sure Ben was comfortable, happy, and safe, while I was left to fend for myself. It's like they were raising him up while slowly pushing me further and further down. Even now, all these years later, it's hard to shake the feeling that I was never good enough for them. But back then, as a kid, all I wanted was a little bit of what Ben got, a little bit of love, a little bit of attention. But that wasn't in the cards for me. After high school, I knew I needed to get out of that house. I had been counting down the days until graduation like it was my ticket to freedom. The only thing keeping me sane during those years was the thought that eventually, I could leave and start over somewhere far away from all the mess at home. Honestly, I wouldn't have been able to do it without my grandparents. They were my lifeline. When senior year rolled around, my grandparents made it clear they'd help me get through college. I'll never forget the day they told me. I was sitting at their kitchen table, just going on about how stressed I was about my future because, at that point, I didn't even know if my mom was going to help pay for college. It's not like she ever talked to me about it. All I knew was that Ben was getting everything handed to him on a silver platter: new car, college tuition, you name it. My grandpa looked at me and said, "We're going to help you, kid. You deserve a shot at a good life." Just like that, they offered to pay for my college tuition. I couldn't believe it. It felt like a weight had lifted off my shoulders. My mom had barely spoken to me about college plans, but my grandparents had my back without hesitation. The moment I got accepted into college, I knew there was no looking back. I moved in with my grandparents, and I remember feeling this overwhelming sense of relief. It was the first time in my life I felt safe, like I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore. My grandparents' house was small, nothing fancy, but it was cozy, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like a real home. Living with them was completely different from the hellhole I grew up in. They actually asked about my day, cooked meals with me, and showed genuine interest in what I was doing. It was like a whole new world, and for the first time, I felt like I had people who saw me for who I was, not some reminder of past mistakes or someone they had to deal with. I threw myself into college, wanting to make my grandparents proud. My mom, on the other hand, barely even called. The only time I'd hear from her was when she needed something or when she wanted to remind me how great Ben was doing. She'd say stuff like, "You know, Ben got into this amazing business program," or, "Ben's doing so well, you should take notes." It was like she had to rub it in my face that he was the successful one. Honestly, it stung, but I'd gotten good at pretending like I didn't care. Nick wasn't any different. He'd show up at family gatherings, the few I actually attended, and go on and on about how proud he was of Ben. It was always Ben's this, Ben's that. Not once did he ask me how I was doing or what I was studying. It was like, to them, I was just the kid they had to put up with until I was gone. Well, guess what? I was gone, and it felt amazing. But you know, the weird thing is, even though I was out of that toxic environment, the damage was still there. I'd still catch myself wondering if my mom ever thought about me or if she'd ever reach out just to ask if I was okay. She didn't. It was radio silence most of the time, and when she did reach out, it was more like she was checking off a box rather than actually caring. I kept myself busy with classes, work, and new friends. I got involved in a few clubs on campus, went out a bit, and for once, I felt like I was actually building a life of my own. But every time I'd get a notification or a message from my mom, I felt that knot in my stomach again, like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She'd usually just ask for quick updates, but it was always in this detached, distant tone. I could tell she was just going through the motions. One day, during my second year, she called me out of the blue. It was weird because she never called unless she needed something. I hesitated but answered anyway. The conversation was so awkward. She tried to make small talk, asking about my classes and my friends, but it felt so forced. Then she dropped the real reason for her call: she needed money. I was shocked. I mean, I was just a college student, barely making enough to pay for my books and rent. She knew that, but apparently, Ben had messed up. She didn't give me the details, just that he needed a little help, and she wondered if I could pitch in. I was stunned. She had no problem asking her daughter, who she practically ignored for years, to help out her precious Ben. I told her straight up, "Mom, I don't have money to spare. I'm barely getting by myself." She sighed, one of those long, exaggerated sighs, and said, "Well, I thought you'd be more responsible now that you're living on your own." I just sat there, speechless. I could feel the anger boiling up, all those years of feeling like I wasn't enough, and now she was making me feel guilty for not bailing out the son she favored over me. After that call, I made a promise to myself to focus on my own life and stop trying to win her approval. It was clear that no matter what I did, it was never going to be enough. So, I doubled down on my studies, kept working part-time, and saved as much as I could. The less I talked to her, the better I felt. Fast forward to graduation, and I was doing pretty well. I had a job lined up, and my grandparents were so proud of me. They showed up at my graduation, cheering like I was the only person there. But guess who didn't show up? My mom, Nick, or Ben. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but it still hurt, you know? I mean, they showed up to every one of Ben's events, but when it came to me, it was like I didn't exist. After the ceremony, my grandparents took me out for dinner, and we celebrated my achievement. It was one of the happiest moments of my life, and for a little while, I managed to forget about my mom and all the crap from my past. I was just proud of myself for getting through it all. After graduation, my grandparents offered to let me live with them while I got on my feet. I was grateful, of course, but I wanted to have a place of my own eventually. I started working full-time and saving up. My grandparents were always there, supporting me and making sure I had everything I needed. I couldn't have asked for better people in my life. But then, about a year after I started my job, everything changed. My grandpa got really sick. It all happened so fast. One minute he was fine, and the next, he was in the hospital. My grandma was trying to hold it together, but I could see she was struggling. I tried to be there for both of them as much as I could, but it was hard. Losing him was the hardest thing I'd ever gone through. It felt like I'd lost a part of myself. A few months after that, my grandma passed away too. It was like losing the only two people who ever truly cared about me. The house was so quiet and empty without them, but they had left everything to me, their home, their savings, everything. It was overwhelming. I was grateful, but at the same time, I just wanted them back. I moved into their house, and for a while, it felt strange, like I was living in a memory. But I made it my own. I painted the walls, redecorated, and turned it into a place that felt like mine. It was bittersweet, but I knew they'd be happy to see me making a life for myself. Living there alone gave me time to think. I finally had space, physical and emotional, to start figuring out who I was without my mom's shadow over me. I still kept in touch, but it was distant. I only felt obligated to do so, not because I really wanted to. As much as I loved my grandparents and everything they did for me, the absence of my mom's support still lingered in the back of my mind, even if I tried to act like it didn't bother me. So, after a couple of years of living in my grandparents' house and getting used to my new life, I was finally in a place where things felt stable. I had my routine, work, hobbies, hanging out with a few friends, and honestly, it felt good. No drama, no family chaos, just peace. But that all got flipped when Ben decided to pop back into my life out of nowhere. One day, I got a notification on my phone. It was a message request on social media, and it was from Ben. I hadn't heard from him in almost 2 years. We'd pretty much cut off all communication after I moved in with my grandparents. I just figured we'd moved on with our lives separately, so seeing his name pop up kind of threw me off. I remember staring at the screen, debating if I should even open it. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the message. It was this long, rambling paragraph. He started off with the usual small talk, asking how I'd been and saying he hoped I was doing well. But it didn't take long for him to get to the point. He and his family were getting evicted. He wrote about how their landlord was kicking them out, and they couldn't find another place to live because, apparently, no one was willing to rent to them. He didn't give much detail beyond that, just that it was bad enough that no one wanted them. He said they'd found a place in a really sketchy area, but he didn't feel comfortable moving his family there, especially with his daughter, Adeline. She's like 4 or 5 now, I think. Anyway, he went on about how unsafe it was and how he was trying to do what was best for her. Then came the big favor. He asked if they could stay with me for a while until they got back on their feet. I'm not going to lie, my first reaction was just pure confusion. Like, why me? We barely talked as kids, and the few times we did, it was him bullying me. I mean, we weren't exactly close, and since we became adults, he's never reached out unless he needed something. Now, all of a sudden, he's playing the we're family card. It just felt weird. I sat there, staring at the message, trying to wrap my head around it. Part of me felt bad, but another part of me was annoyed. It's like he was pretending that all the years of him treating me like crap just didn't happen. And then, the way he phrased it, he acted like he was being so generous by offering to help with rent while staying at my place. But if you're getting evicted, how much could you really afford? Still, I didn't reply right away. I needed to think about it. I told myself maybe he's changed, but the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. It didn't sit right with me that he'd just pop back up when he needed something. So, I let the message sit there for a while. A few days later, he messaged me again, this time with a little more urgency. He said that the situation was getting worse and that they had no options left. He laid it on thick, talking about how his daughter was scared and how they were out of time. He mentioned that my house was perfect for them because of the extra bedrooms and the big backyard, which would be great for Adeline. He even tried to sweeten the deal by saying they'd stay out of my way because of our different work schedules. I finally decided to reply. I started off by saying that I was sorry he was going through all that, but I wasn't comfortable with the idea of them moving in. I explained that, given our past and the way he treated me, it just didn't feel right. I tried to be as respectful as possible, but I wanted to be honest. Ben's response was immediate, and man, did he double down. He came back with, "That was years ago. We were just kids. You're really going to hold that against me now?" He went on and on about how I needed to let go of the past and how it was time to move on. He even threw in, "It's not about us, it's about Adeline. She's innocent in all this." I felt myself getting frustrated. It was like he was twisting everything to make me feel guilty, like I was the bad guy for not wanting to open my home to him. The way he kept bringing up his daughter felt manipulative. I mean, I get it, no kid should have to suffer for their parents' mistakes, but was that really my responsibility? I told him again that I wasn't comfortable with the idea and that my answer was final. That's when he flipped. He went from trying to guilt trip me to straight up accusing me of being heartless. He wrote, "I thought you changed, but clearly, you're still as selfish as you were when we were kids." He even said I was acting just like my father. That one stung because he knew exactly how my mom used to use that line against me. I didn't reply after that. I was done. I blocked him, but that didn't stop the flood of messages from other people. A couple of days later, I started getting texts from family members I hadn't heard from in ages. Somehow, Ben had rallied them up, and they were all coming at me with the same line, "Think about Adeline." It was like a broken record. My aunt texted me, saying, "I know you've had your differences with Ben, but Adeline shouldn't have to pay the price." An old cousin messaged me on Facebook, basically repeating the same thing. It felt like everyone was trying to guilt trip me into changing my mind. They all acted like I was the villain for not opening my home to family, but none of these people had been there for me when I needed support. None of them cared when I was the one who felt abandoned. The pressure was getting to me. I started doubting myself, thinking maybe they're right, maybe I'm being too harsh. But then I reminded myself that Ben never once apologized for how he treated me as a kid, not even once. The fact that he couldn't even acknowledge it now, as an adult, just showed me he hadn't changed at all. The final straw was when my own mom called. She rarely calls unless there's a major issue, so I knew she was going to side with Ben. She didn't waste time getting to the point. She asked me why I was refusing to help my brother. I tried explaining my side, how Ben had always been cruel to me and never took accountability, but she cut me off. She said, "Well, Ben's my son, and I have to prioritize him and his family." It was like a slap in the face. All those years she made me feel like I wasn't good enough, and now, even as an adult, she was still doing it. She called Ben her son but talked about me like I was some distant relative. I felt this mix of anger and sadness, but mostly, it was just disappointment. I hung up, realizing that no matter what I did, my mom would never see me as her priority. It was always going to be about Ben. So, I stood my ground. I wasn't going to let him move in, no matter how much they tried to guilt trip me. It felt good to finally say no and stick to it, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't mess with my head. It's hard to shake that feeling of being the bad guy, especially when everyone around you is telling you that you are. After I told Ben no and blocked him, I thought things would settle down, but it was just the start of the fallout. Turns out, Ben wasn't done trying to get what he wanted. He must have told everyone in the family about our conversation, and of course, he painted himself as the victim. Suddenly, I was getting bombarded with messages from family members I hadn't heard from in years. It's wild how people who have barely spoken to me in ages were suddenly all up in my business, telling me how disappointed they were in me. My phone kept lighting up with messages like, "How could you turn your back on family?" Or "Adeline is an innocent child." They acted like I was some heartless monster for not wanting to open my home to a guy who bullied me for years. It was like they all had collective amnesia about the way Ben treated me growing up. One of my cousins, who I haven't talked to in forever, sent me this long-winded Facebook message about how I needed to rise above the past and be the bigger person. It was like they all had the same script or something. I was fuming, but I just ignored most of it. I mean, what's the point? These were people who didn't know anything about what I went through as a kid. They only saw the side Ben showed them, and he was always good at playing the nice guy when he needed to. But then, one day, I got a knock at my door, and guess who it was? My mom. I hadn't seen her in person for months, and honestly, I wasn't expecting a visit. She showed up looking all stressed and tired, like she had the weight of the world on her shoulders. I was tempted to just not open the door, but I knew she'd just keep knocking, so I let her in. She wasted no time. She sat down and went straight into this lecture about how I was being selfish and how Ben was struggling and, as a sister, I needed to help. I tried to keep my cool, but it was hard. I told her, "Mom, he treated me like garbage for years. He never even apologized, and now you expect me to just let him move in like nothing happened?" She sighed, like she was exhausted from the conversation already, and said, "People change. He's different now. He's a father, and he's trying his best." And then she pulled the classic line, "You, of all people, should understand what it's like to struggle." That one got under my skin because she knew I struggled, and she didn't do anything about it when I was a kid. I felt my hands shaking, trying to keep myself from snapping at her. I told her flat out, "Ben's never taken responsibility for anything he's done, not once. Has he tried to apologize or even acknowledge the way he treated me? And you and Nick just let it happen." She gave me this look, one of those disappointed frowns she always used to give me when I was a kid. "You need to move on," she said. "Holding on to grudges won't help anyone, especially not Adeline." I felt like I was hitting a wall. It was the same story over and over, blame me for not letting go, but no one ever told Ben to take accountability. I asked her why Ben couldn't stay with her and Nick instead, and she got all defensive. "Well, you know we don't have the space, and Nick's health hasn't been the best lately." It was just excuse after excuse. She started getting emotional, talking about how Adeline was suffering and how it broke her heart to see her granddaughter in such a situation. I could tell she was trying to guilt-trip me, and for a second, I almost caved. But then I remembered all the times she ignored me when I needed her most, all the times she sided with Ben even when he was clearly in the wrong, and it clicked. I wasn't going to be manipulated into fixing their mess, not this time. I stood up and told her, "I'm sorry, but my answer is still no. I'm not going to let them move in." She stared at me for a moment, and then she just said, "I expected better from you." That hurt more than I thought it would. I was so used to her disappointment, but hearing her say it like that felt like a punch in the gut. But I stayed firm and told her that she had to leave. She got up, grabbed her purse, and as she walked out, she mumbled something about how she couldn't believe how ungrateful I was. I shut the door behind her and felt this mix of anger and relief. It was like, for once, I had stood my ground, but at the same time, I felt this heaviness, like I was the one who did something wrong. Over the next few days, the texts and messages from family members didn't stop. In fact, they got worse. It felt like they were all joining forces to make me feel guilty. A couple of them even started posting vague comments on Facebook about family abandoning family and some people being so full of pride they forget their roots. It didn't take a genius to figure out who they were talking about. One of my aunts, who I hadn't spoken to since my grandparents' funeral, even called me, leaving this long voicemail about how I needed to forgive and forget because family is all we've got. She went on and on about how Ben was struggling and how it was up to me to do the right thing. But none of these people ever reached out to me when I was struggling, not when I was alone as a kid, not when my grandparents passed, and definitely not when I was trying to make it through college. It was all about Ben, as always. Eventually, I had to block a few of them because it was getting to the point where it was just harassment. They wouldn't take no for an answer, and I was done explaining myself. I didn't owe them an explanation. I knew that deep down, but it still messed with my head. It's hard not to feel guilty when everyone around you is telling you you're the problem. But then, one day, I ran into an old friend from high school at the grocery store. We started catching up, and she asked how things were going with my family. I told her the whole story, not really expecting much from her, but she surprised me. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Good for you. You don't owe them anything, especially not after how they treated you." She reminded me of all the times she'd seen Ben pick on me and how my mom just stood there and let it happen. She said, "You deserve to have your own life without their drama." It was like this huge weight lifted off my shoulders. Hearing someone else say it, for the first time, I felt like maybe I wasn't the bad guy after all. So, I stuck to my decision. I wasn't going to let them bully me into caving. I started focusing on myself again, ignoring the noise from my family. It wasn't easy, and I still had moments where I felt guilty, but I knew deep down that I made the right choice. Ben didn't reach out again after that, which I was fine with. I figured he'd move on to the next person who would give him what he wanted. And my mom? Well, I knew she was mad, but I wasn't going to chase after her approval anymore. I'd spent too many years trying to get it, and it was never enough. It was tough realizing that sometimes family isn't what you hope it'll be, but in the end, I had to look out for myself. I wasn't going to be used as a doormat just because we shared some DNA. Family should be about mutual support, not taking advantage of someone's kindness. And if standing up for myself meant losing people who didn't really value me in the first place, then maybe it wasn't much of a loss at all. So, after everything went down with Ben, my mom, and the whole extended family acting like I was the villain, things went quiet. It was almost unsettling because, for a few weeks, there were no more calls, no texts, and no guilt-trippy messages on social media. It felt weirdly calm, and honestly, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally accepted my decision. But of course, I should have known better. This family doesn't back down that easily. One day, I was coming home from work, and as I pulled into my driveway, I saw this car parked on the street. It took me a second to recognize it, but then I realized it was Ben's car. My stomach dropped. I wasn't expecting any visitors, and I definitely didn't want to deal with him face to face. But there he was, leaning against his car like he had all the time in the world, just waiting. I debated driving off and pretending I didn't see him, but that felt like running away. So, I took a deep breath, parked, and got out of the car. The whole time, I was bracing myself for whatever excuse or sob story he was going to throw at me. But instead, he just stood there, staring at me like I was some stranger. It was awkward as hell. Finally, he broke the silence and said, "We need to talk." I could tell he was trying to sound calm and collected, but there was this edge to his voice that made me uneasy. I just crossed my arms and said, "Look, if you're here to convince me to change my mind, it's not going to happen." He shook his head, and for a moment, I thought he might actually back down. But then he launched into this whole speech about how desperate things had gotten for him and his family. He said they'd been living out of a motel and how they couldn't afford it much longer. He looked so serious, like he was expecting me to just melt and say, "Okay, fine, come on in." But I didn't. I stood my ground. I told him again that I wasn't comfortable with him moving in and that I wasn't going to change my mind. That's when his expression changed. It went from sad and desperate to angry, like, really angry. He started pacing back and forth, his hands clenching into fists. "You don't get it," he snapped. "We have nowhere else to go, and you have this huge house all to yourself. How can you be so selfish?" I felt my face heat up, but I kept my voice steady. "Ben, this isn't about the space. It's about what you put me through when we were kids and the fact that you still refuse to take responsibility for it. You can't just waltz in and expect everything to be fine." I thought maybe he'd calm down, maybe realize that I wasn't budging, but instead, he doubled down. "You know what your problem is?" He shot back. "You're stuck in the past. People grow up, they move on, but you're holding on to grudges like we're still kids. I've got a family to think about, and you're acting like a spoiled brat." Hearing him say that, my heart pounded, and my hands started shaking. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him all the things I've been holding back for years, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. So, I just looked him dead in the eye and said, "This isn't about holding a grudge. It's about protecting myself, and you don't get to tell me how to feel after everything you did." Ben went quiet for a second, and I thought maybe that was it, that maybe he'd finally leave. But instead, he just laughed, this bitter, mocking laugh. "Fine," he said. "You want to act all high and mighty? Go ahead. But don't come crying to me when you need help someday. Family is supposed to be there for each other." And then he just stormed off, got into his car, and drove away. I stood there in the driveway, feeling a mix of anger and relief. Part of me was glad he was gone, but another part of me was furious that he had the nerve to try and guilt-trip me again, like I was the one in the wrong for setting boundaries. The next few days were quiet again, and I thought maybe he finally got the message. But then, a week later, I came home to a surprise. Someone had egged my front door. It was a mess, eggshells and yolk splattered all over. My first thought was that it had to be Ben or one of his friends. Who else would do something like that? I felt this wave of frustration wash over me. It was like I couldn't escape his anger, even when he wasn't physically around. I took pictures of the damage, cleaned it up, and immediately called the police to file a report. I knew it probably wouldn't go anywhere, but I wanted something on record in case things escalated. After that, I decided to install security cameras around the house. I wasn't taking any chances. If Ben or anyone else tried anything again, I wanted proof. I'd had enough of feeling like I was the one in the wrong when all I was doing was protecting my own space and peace of mind. Once the cameras were set up, I felt a bit more at ease, but it didn't stop the tension from hanging over me. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another wave of guilt trip messages or an accidental run-in with Ben. But instead, I got silence. Then, out of nowhere, I got another call from my mom. She hadn't spoken to me since the last time she came over, so I was pretty sure this was going to be another lecture. I considered ignoring it, but I figured I should at least hear her out, maybe she'd finally get it. Well, I was wrong again. The moment I answered, she jumped right in. I heard what happened with Ben. You can't keep turning your back on family like this, she said. It was like she didn't care about my side at all. I told her about the egging, and instead of being concerned, she brushed it off. Oh, don't be dramatic. It was probably some kids messing around. I couldn't believe it. She was defending him, even when I had proof of his behavior escalating. Mom, I know it was him. Who else would do this? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But she just sighed and said, you've made your choice. I hope you don't regret it when you're the one who needs help someday. That was it. I realized then that no matter what I said, no matter how many times I tried to explain myself, she was never going to see things from my perspective. Ben was her priority, and nothing was going to change that. So, I told her, if that's how you feel, then maybe it's better if we don't talk for a while. She didn't even argue. She just said, fine, and hung up. I felt this huge mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a strange sense of relief. It was like I finally accepted that I wasn't going to get the support I'd been hoping for from her or anyone else in that part of the family. Since then, things have been quiet. I haven't heard from Ben, and my mom stayed out of my life. I still get the occasional message from extended family, but I've learned to ignore it. I focused on building my life on my own terms, without needing their approval or validation. The cameras have given me some peace of mind, and I'm making my house feel more like my own safe space again. I've come to terms with the fact that sometimes family isn't the people you share blood with. It's the people who genuinely care about you, who don't try to manipulate or guilt trip you into doing things you're not comfortable with. At the end of the day, I don't regret my decision. It's hard, and it's lonely sometimes, but I know I did the right thing by standing my ground. I don't owe anyone my peace, not even family. And if that means some doors are permanently shut, then so be it. I'd rather be alone than surrounded by people who don't respect my boundaries.